Westside Church in Bend, Oregon. This is Behind the Message. In this podcast, we take you behind what we teach here at Westside, and I'm Ben Fleming.
I'm Evan Earwicker, and today we are discussing prayer, as we have been for a couple weeks, and we will continue to do so. We're walking the church through practices of prayer, but also a posture of prayer, right? Mm-hmm. And this weekend was really special. We celebrated 70 years as a church, which is kind of crazy when you think about all the changes that have happened in this town over 70 years, that Westside, our church, has been a part of it for all that time.
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit in my messages last weekend, but I don't feel fraudulent, but certainly humbled by the idea that I've only been here for the last 8 years, and you stand in the line of history of 70 years with all the faces and people and influential folks and volunteers, and to look out into that crowd. I don't know if you have a similar feeling, because you've been here for probably twice as long as I have. But yeah, what a special moment, right?
Yeah, it was really cool. And the town, I was thinking about this yesterday driving past Costco. So if you're not from around Bend, we're building, I think it's the second largest Costco in the world. I've heard this.
Was that a real thing?
This is maybe all rumors, but I heard one of the executives from Costco is actually relocating to Bend.
No way.
And so it's going to be something like a flagship Costco. I mean, it's huge. It is a massive Costco.
That's the interior square footage, or it couldn't be the overall footprint.
These are
right?
all just rumors, so you can make up whatever you want.
No, I need details.
But
you clearly
the reason I bring it up, because I remember when the first Costco went in like, I don't know, 95 or something, and it was the first time we felt like, okay, our town has grown up. We got a Costco now. And now, we have this Costco that's like twice the size, and it feels like a metaphor for our town, that like through 70 years, we were just this mountain town, very small, I think 11,000 people when our church was founded. And now all these people are constantly moving in, and it feels like a moment, right, to, I don't know, double down on what we've always been, because we have so many people coming into this place.
Yeah, and how this relates to prayer. This last weekend was a commissioning prayer, dedicating prayer is what we called it. I certainly clumsily, or not at all, described that. But I feel like we did it through the course of the teaching, and then Steve Mickle, former senior pastor here, prayed over the church and had a bit of a prophetic word as we were heading out the door, so to speak. We did commission the church into the next era of whatever Westside is supposed to look like. As far as the actual like nuts and bolts descriptions, I did not do a very good job of that. But it was such a beautiful moment. Yeah, Bend feels like it's in a particular place right now in context when it comes to growth, and then who is coming into town is different than it's ever been before. And that means Westside must be commissioned or sent into this new era as well, not to become something that is simply purely a reflection of the neighborhood that we live in, but to be someone that is then equipped and feeling like prophetically we get to move into a ministry that is serving different people in a city that looks far different now than it did 70 years ago.
Right. You started your message talking about how you kind of feel like not unworthy, but like intimidated by the moment to be the one speaking this. And why do you think you feel that way? Because, I mean, you have the title. You're senior pastor of this church. Like, there's I would say there's no one else. There's me. But together, like, we're leading the church, but I totally relate. So what is that feeling of saying, like, oh my goodness, I'm really the person now to lead this moment?
Yeah. And I've been here 8 years, right? So yeah, there is something funny. I love holy ground, I've noticed, and this comes into my sports background for sure. I remember playing baseball or whatever for a long time, and then I worked for a newspaper, and I worked in the sports department, and there were times where coaches were like, why don't you come into the dugout and interview the player, interview me? And I'd be like, that's a holy place to me. Dugouts, that belongs to a specific group of people, right? And I felt this in traveling to Europe, and there's even some churches in some places where they're like, you come in and tour this. I'm like, I don't want to tour the church. It's a holy place to me. And maybe that's just weird or whatever, but I feel it in my body. And I kind of felt that when I walked up onto the platform of like, how am I going to address 70 years of what has gone on? This is a holy place to me. And creating that perspective for everybody in here is a holy thing that I know that I'm equipped to do. And I think is something that I should do. Of course, we have the title. Maybe it was overall just a good thing and a feeling of humility and pause that is prayerful, right? We talked a little bit last week about different kinds of prayer. I think that was kind of a prayerful moment to me, to stop and take a deep breath and consider what has been without jumping in and trying to pretend like I can fully grasp or understand the history of the church, right? I think that was it.
And I think that resonates with the idea of a prayer of commissioning, because I think throughout the biblical narrative and in my own experience in leadership, we're always called. If God is calling you, it's probably going to call you into something that you feel in the moment inadequate for or under-resourced, and that creates this dependence and reliance on the power of God to even feel like okay in those spaces, right? Yeah. It's not even like, am I completely confident in this? Maybe sometimes, but sometimes it's like, I don't know that I could stand up and face this crowd, except that I'm relying on God in this moment. I feel that often, especially in preaching, of like you said, who am I to be the one with the microphone? Who am I to be leading this? But then you look back in the narrative, and not that we're comparing ourselves to Moses, but that's the feeling he had. Like, who am I to speak to these people? Who am I to deliver the nation? And I think that comes with God's design for Holy Spirit-led leaders, right?
It's good if you don't stay there. Moses didn't stay there in this, oh my gosh, I can't possibly do this thing. He moved on and then, was commissioned, moved into the next thing. But maybe some of the power of commissioning is, and I guess I'll pose the question to you, do you think we do have to kind of have that understanding or that humility of what has gone on in the past before we're commissioned into something else?
Yeah, I felt like it's been very important for us in the time that we're leading to never ignore what's brought us here. That's been a value of mine. And even, when we hit the anniversaries every fall, historically, I don't know that we even would mark anniversaries, and I get it. It's like, oh, it's the 41st anniversary of the church. Who cares, right? These big ones obviously feel like they're more weighty. But I think it's important, the importance of elders in our culture, as those get diminished, and influencers are the final voice on all, I hope not. I hope there's a collective sense of the past and those that have brought us here, and how we stand on their shoulders. It's not enough, I don't think, just to inherit a bunch of cool stuff and then be like, yeah, look what we built. I think it's important to recognize, as we do in these moments, Ken Johnson poured a lot of his life and soul and heart into the community that now we shepherd. Steve Mickle, the Haynes we just saw last night, who pastored this church for a while. I think even just acknowledging hey, we didn't show up one day, Ben and I, and just create this thing. We have received from generations gone by something of God's work, and now we're stewards of that. We're not the founders of it. We're not the emperors of this little empire, but we are the stewards of the work of God as part of the larger, kingdom of God, right?
Yeah. And there's something, I don't know how often we consider commissioning prayer. Even in prep for this message, I asked the question, where does commissioning show up in other areas of our lives? I think we referenced the commissioning of a ship, right? Throw some champagne off of the side of it, and it's off on its first voyage. And even this is a big community with a long heritage. 70th we're commissioning into. Do you think commissioning prayer is something that belongs in the lives of individuals or even families? And is there a way to bring it into our routine? Can we commission ourselves into a next era of life? Right. I guess I'm just wondering how this might relate to the individual as opposed to just a big church with 70 years under its belt.
Yeah, I think you see this pop up in really helpful ways. I know John Tyson has a book on fatherhood, The Intentional Father, or something along those lines, really encouraging dads, for instance, and this is just one piece, but dads to not just mindlessly autopilot through key moments in a child's life as they're growing up into men and women. I think he's specifically talking about boys, but these ideas of culturally, we just don't mark these moments. Historically, for thousands, millennia, humans have marked in very intentional ways the transition from childhood into adulthood. And we still do it with marriages, weddings, but even those, I think we see a trend of making those less and less sacred, less and less. And I'm not talking about just religious, but just less important. It's a very casual thing. And I wonder, like, does that steal something culturally of our soul, our community, when we no longer think it's important to have almost a ceremony with a child as they're, 13 years old, or, stepping into historically what has been adulthood, and say, no, we're going to make this a moment. We're going to make this important. You're going to remember this. And I think those carry weight, not just because culturally it happens, but we see that, I think, in the Bible too, right?
Yeah, I think of ordination for us, which we get licensed through our denomination, which comes with some actual changes, right? As far as our connection to the denomination, all that. And then I remember ordination snuck up on me, and I was here, and Steve emailed me and was like, hey, you haven't been ordained yet, right? And I was like, no. And he said, cool, you're going to get ordained in the next week or whatever. And I was like, okay, what does it even mean exactly? And it happened here at Westside. So it was the church I was already at. And then I got a certificate as I walked across the platform, which for someone like me, I'm like, yippee, I don't even know where I'm going to put this, and I don't really care about it. And you could print this for anybody. I could print this for myself. But then we moved into a time that, again, I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, so the people that I'm with all the time are going to pray for me, and that's this ceremony. And then I was caught off guard by how beautiful and powerful it was. I still have the recordings of the prayers, and that was a moment, weeping with friends and family and pastors, because it was a marking of and a calling up into this calling that, yeah. And I think maybe I fell victim to some of the more modern individualistic kind of feeling of like, I don't need your traditions and your old whatevers. I see right through them, and there's no value to it. But then actively participating in it, there's a real power to it. And yeah, I wonder if there's other rocks that we could kind of kick over, maybe with our children or even ourselves. I could see an individual coming out of a difficult era of life, and then even commissioning themselves, right? To, okay, now I'm putting my foot in the ground, I'm planting my flag on this mile marker, and I'm walking forward into a new thing. May the road rise to meet me, kind of a moment as we head out the door, right?
So let's talk about that. I think there is a need for the community to act in commissioning ways. But so I would say, sure, yeah. I think moments of like dedication of oneself or surrender to a process or a new season or in prayer on an individual level. But as we're talking about commissioning, I just think there's something about this is a communal act, right? I even think of like, it's hard to come up with cultural examples these days, but the military, I think, probably is a good example, and the government, when someone's sworn in as a judge or commissioned as an officer, there's something of the authority of the state or the military being endowed on that person who's receiving that. And I actually think that's rooted in religious ceremony, right? Where something of God's authority is being given, but that's happening in a community, and the reason I bring that up, because the last thing I would want is someone to be like, I am anointing myself with my own authority. I am God's man, Napoleon did that, right? Where he said, hey, I'm gonna be crowned. I'm gonna be crowned emperor. Here's what's gonna happen. Pope, come here and do. And it's like, wow. Or did he crown himself? It was crazy, right?
I mean, I think it essentially comes down to, yes, he crowned himself, right?
Yeah.
And you could say maybe he added other mechanisms to make it appear like something else. But yes, Napoleon took the power and crowned himself.
And there's something very base appealing about this idea of you go out and you grab your authority. Mm-hmm. But so much more the Jesus way when we're in a community, and that community says, we believe that it is good to us and the Holy Spirit that we're going to commission you into this work. And I think we do that with babies when we dedicate. There's no biblical baby dedication process like baptism and the table, but we do it. And I think that is commissioning parents really to lead and to disciple their own kids. And that comes out of the community. I think there's a power in that it's not just them saying, oh, we want to do a good job with our kids, but it's the church coming around them and saying, we're commissioning you, we're calling you into something, and there's authority that's coming with this moment.
Where does that power come from, you think? Why does that, why could I be caught off guard by dedication prayer from my family and friends and coworkers? What is that touch inside of our souls that makes such a big difference, that kind of our tribe and our community comes around us and says these things? Because again, I'm already pastoring, I'm already licensed, and I already have a job. It didn't come with a pay raise, it didn't come with a title, it didn't come with a move to a different city. And it was a moment. What does that get a hold of inside of us that just seems to make such a difference, right? And I love to believe that I don't need like people's acknowledgement in community where they see me and I go, yeah, no, I got a lot of self-confidence, self-esteem. I believe in myself. I don't need exterior forces to come and tell me that I'm whatever. And then they do. And I'm like, oh, I feel so good.
Yeah.
This is amazing. I want more of that.
And isn't that the point? You do need it. Like oftentimes, because we post things and we're a church, we'll get trolls online that'll come and, just say like, you guys are crazy and none of this is necessary. And, it's all fairy tales. And that happens every once in a while. And whenever those things come up, I always have the thought of, even if you didn't believe in God as we do, or believe in that, at some point you're going to realize that if you strip away all the things that you technically don't believe matter, you're going to end up stripping away so much that life will be completely devoid of meaning, religious or not. You take away like, well, there's no need to sit with your family around the table. You could just, grab a pouch of, nutritious goo and survive. Well, yeah, you could survive in a way. And before you know, it's like the Matrix, right? Where you're just like in a chamber getting sludge fed to you to keep you. That's no way to live.
Right. Yeah.
But I that's a very obviously exaggerated thing. But I think that is, what we wrestle with is people assuming like, well, let's just do away with the unnecessary ceremonies and the unnecessary points of connection, the unnecessary community, and just go with what we want to do all the time and not submit ourselves to tradition or ceremony or these moments of spiritual connection in the community. You start to strip those away, and what do we become? Where's our culture? Where is our sense of self in the community? All that starts to get stripped away. And we, of course, believe that in the middle of that is the Spirit of God calling us to these practices, right? So there's layers of this that I think create purpose and a sense of well-being and health. And, mental health is just spiraling nationwide. At the same time, we're dismantling all of these cultural touch points and moments of community. I draw the line,
Yeah, and heartbreaking that the negative pieces of especially religions and leadership and things like that always grab the headlines. I mean, mostly it's heartbreaking that there's been such a rampant abuse of leadership. And so we associate these traditions and these mechanisms and systems and communities with these things that have really let us down over time. And they absolutely have let us down. But that leading to the really aggressive swing on the other side of the pendulum to, I don't need you, I don't need any of this thing anymore. I'm going to go ahead and tell my own story and make my own way. Of course, there's individuals, there are our own stories, there are our own thoughts and desires and whatever, but the beauty is when those exist within the realm of community as well, right? And we partner together because we're made for this. We're social primates, right? We're built to be in community, building something together. And so,
social primates, or as we would say it, made in the image of God, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. The scientific term would be the social primate, right? And social primates made in the image of God. I make everybody happy? Is that good?
I think you made no one happy. Yeah. And the pendulum swing, right? Because people have seen abusive leadership and manipulation of people using power, especially religious power. We can come to the conclusion that all authority is bad authority. And so we're just going to throw off the chains of authority and become like spiritual anarchists, And I think we've seen that play out. And because one thing was bad doesn't mean the opposite is good, right? Yeah. And so I think understanding the proper place for God's authority and how it plays out, not in abusive ways, but healthy structures. And I think that's what we're leaning into, is shared leadership and thorough accountability structures, even within our denomination and church. And I hope people catch, like, let that extend into your businesses. Let that extend into your family. Husbands, don't abuse your wives. Wives, don't manipulate your husbands. Like, the way you treat your children, all of that should have these markers of healthy authority. And we fight against this all the time, this approach to even relationships between husbands and wives that look like abuse or domineering, or which are twisting of Scripture, right? And so we've got to get back to this idea of what is the role of authority that looks like Jesus.
Yeah. It's a good practice for anybody in leadership, I think, in business or in church or whatever, to say, because the tempting thing is to say, well, everybody's pulling away from community. They don't want a part of this anymore. And our traditions just don't mean anything or matter anymore. It's kind of screaming at the clouds. And to be regularly doing the work to say, but are we creating this foundation where we've provided this community that does feel safe? It does feel worthy of participating in, so to speak. And, there's a lot of push and pull on there, where we certainly don't want to just say, forget you guys, all this individualist garbage, even Disney, you find them swinging back with some of these, like, I love the story of Moana, right? And how independent and like tradition breaking it is, but then ultimately it is her story found still within the context of this people and this culture that are bound together no matter what. I think that's kind of what we're a part of and what we're looking for as this community, right?
Yeah. Which I'm hoping that we see you dressed as Maui on Halloween. Let's see that happen.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even consider that one.
Think about it. Yeah,
I'm very much like The Rock, except for not anything at all.
The only thing you lack is that grass skirt.
That's the only thing.
That is the only thing.
I did go Halloween costume shopping with my kids the other day. Yeah.
Yeah. What can you tell what you're going to be? Can you tell us?
I didn't get anything for myself just yet. I'm working on it. I'm thinking Scooby-Doo.
Okay.
Because I'm a big fan of Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo people? Anybody? Lindsay in here? Evan? Scooby-Doo folks? You're too young?
Too young for Scooby-Doo?
No, Scooby-Doo transcends generations. That's not just a specific era.
I'm old. I can make that joke. I'm not a Scooby-Doo fan.
Oh, okay. Fine. Why you gotta be such a downer? Scooby-Doo fan?
No.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, I don't know that I've met too many like our age Scooby-Doo fans. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
I can. Scooby-Doo. Well, you brought it up last week too, so I can tell.
Did I bring up Scooby-Doo?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
It's getting kind of
This is a Scooby-Doo podcast. We did walk into the costume thing, and it was so funny, and it was so representative of my children. Joel goes in and finds Patrick Star from SpongeBob and immediately just wants that. And my daughter goes in and she points at this one thing. She goes, Dad, I love that one. Keep that one in mind. Remember that one. And I look at it and it just says the devil on it. It's like this
the devil.
Red dress. I was like, I'm up for a lot of things. Maybe we don't go like so on the nose with kind of that. I think she ended up with something from Harry Potter instead. She looks like she's Hermione Granger, I think is the outfit now.
Which growing up, some people would say that's the devil
Well, that's true. Yeah, there's a whole nother podcast that we could do around that. We'll see. Maybe I'll end up with Scooby-Doo. Yeah, man, this is, I do want to just be careful to make sure that we really embrace marking this moment as a church.
Yeah. You talked about in the message too, just how suffering plays a role in all this, and you mentioned some of the things that we've walked through as a church. I think it was really meaningful, even for those that haven't walked through that because they're new. So they didn't walk through when Steve and Suzanne lost their son in a car wreck. They didn't walk through when Bo lost her husband to ALS. So some of these things, they weren't there, but even hearing you talk about the journey that we've all walked through together as a community, not that everyone in the room was there, but that as a community, we walked through some difficulty. How do you think that forms us as stepping into it, like a new season, looking forward? Why do we care about suffering and what we've walked through?
Yeah, I mean, I'll frame it for me, which I think then translates to the church. Number one, I think you feel it still within our church and in how you and I teach. There's even like a pacing sometimes, right? That comes along with how we teach that wasn't me before I got here to Westside. I think it was something that I learned, and not trying to jump past or just get beyond as quickly as you could grief and suffering and difficulty. And when you read the biblical narrative all the way through it, from Old Testament to New Testament to creation to Revelation, there is this suffering and this grief that happens inside these communities of people. And the authors of Scripture are not shy about sharing the impact that had on themselves and the people. And so I think we've done so much work, certainly since I've been here, but even before that, to slow that pace down and to not try to fly by those pieces for people. And I think when people come up to me and they say, there's something that feels real and authentic about what we do, I don't know that that's something specifically in what we teach always. It's something in the fabric of who we are that people sense and understand. And I would love to see that continue on. I think that's a big part of our leadership and what we need to be going forward, is to continue to honor that without just simply sitting in grief and being that, we celebrate as well. And that was kind of the beauty. I think that's what you felt Sunday I agree. It was a celebration, and we acknowledged the grief that's in our heritage, right?
Yeah. And we joked like it wasn't a celebration of life for the, this is a memorial service for Westside. Of course not. And I think Sunday maybe more than other times when we've talked about the role of suffering, you did a really good job. And I think the moment served it well of, there wasn't any hopelessness in that, or like, and so we're sad. It didn't feel Eeyore, right? But there was a sense of, this has shaped who we are, and we're not afraid to acknowledge that. And I think, especially in modern life, we try to insulate ourselves from pain and suffering. And when people do suffer, we have this very, I don't want that to get on me kind of, so I want to, even when I'm caring for you or you're my friend, to a point, but it just, I don't have the bandwidth to handle my life and your suffering. Sometimes that can be the feeling, right?
Yeah.
And so in this community, to acknowledge like, hey, we're okay when life is real and life is hard, but that's not going to keep us from hope. And I think you referenced hope specifically on the, not even the other side, but through the suffering, that we find the hope that is the anchor for our souls, like Hebrews says, in the middle of suffering, not in spite of it, not on the other side of it only, but like in the middle of it, we find the closeness of Jesus. And that's my suspicion, right? Is that the whole Christian story is how we experience the closeness of God in suffering.
Yeah, which makes it a shame that, and I don't want to speak for all traditions, I just know that something happened to me somewhere along the way where I was like, man, if I'm really grieving, I'm in the wrong place. I'm not getting to the victory that I believe belongs to me due to the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, right? And to get permission, which is, I think, what's relatable. So we talk about all the time how we look out into that room and we go, yeah, this isn't the same church that was here 5 years ago or 7, 8 years ago when Bo and Steve were going through so much and the church was collectively suffering together. But the relatability is the invitation that history offers us to say, you can absolutely come and weep and grieve and, in a real depth, you can mourn here. And to a little bit more of a shallow degree, you can come and just be not feeling it in worship today. Those are things that absolutely belong as part of who we are in our tradition. And you get to learn how to find these little pieces and bits of hope along the way that will grow and then sustain you through the next piece of suffering or grieving that you may encounter, or to encourage other people. And I think that's what resonated with folks. I talked to a lot of people that, I talked to a few people that were like, the older guy at the end that came up, he's a former senior pastor. Oh, Steve Mickle. Oh yeah, that guy. And I was like, oh gosh, that's right. People are new. People are new.
Yeah, they don't know.
And, but they were communicating that relatability to that. And so the beauty of the anniversary was we really painted that broader picture for them of why they feel like that can belong here. You can come to Westside and you can doubt and be frustrated,
right.
And give up for a while, right? That's we've talked about the critical journey. You go through these first few steps of faith that are marked by a lot of enthusiasm. And there's a wall.
Yeah.
And you can either sometimes sit and even weep at the foot of that wall before we figure out how to slowly work our way through, or you can just loop back into kind of this ignorant enthusiasm again until you hit the wall and then loop back again, or quit. And I think we are a people that, we don't want to stay at the wall, but man, we're really okay with people taking their time at it because we've taken our time at it.
Yeah. And I don't know that we have people that probably assume that's not the case, right? And so I think even verbalizing it is a relief to some. It's a wow moment to others. They're like, oh, wow, I can be honest about the doubts I'm having about my faith and still be welcomed here. I can walk through grief and not feel like people are going to be annoyed by that, or that's going to be too much of a burden. And again, props to you, man, because you, in a very short sermon, kind of hit all of these welcomes and giving permission and saying wherever you're at, you're in this community and you can be you. And then we commission you, and I love that idea of don't project who you want to be and then we'll commission you into the work of this community. But no, come as you are. Mm-hmm. You have permission to doubt and grieve and be joyful and all those things. And now that who's here, let's step into the next season and the next chapter of the church. I think it's the Jesus way. I really do.
I love how you frame that. The real you can be commissioned and sent, right? And maybe that's the unspoken thing, is this idea of if I simply change everything in my life or I make all these big adjustments, then I'll be worthy of this commissioning. Right. And we're not asking the church to do that.
Right. And it goes back to the Great Commission in Matthew 28. Jesus stands with his disciples days, let's say hours, a lot of hours, but hours after they all abandoned him at the cross. His greatest moment for his friends. They all abandon him. They all walk away. Peter denies him. It's just days later, and he says, now you go into all the world, make disciples of all nations, baptizing. I mean, it's the greatest commission of all time. That's why we call it the Great Commission. And it's given to the guys who completely failed, not years in the past. They didn't walk all through a process of figuring, it was days or weeks after. And he's saying, I'm going to go away now, and this is on you. And I feel that sometimes we assume we're not ready for what God is calling us into and what we're commissioned into. And it's those moments oftentimes where I think the voice of Jesus comes and says, now you go into all the world. And for the next 70 years, right?
Yeah.
In this church.
Well, and so that's the other piece of the commissioning that I didn't really talk about much on Sunday, but I certainly felt is you have the humility on the front end of all the things that have happened before me and the reason this building that's built. And then you stop and are kind of humbled then by the other side of, we'll provide what I believe to be a good and powerful and healthy blip on the radar of Westside Church, right?
Yeah.
If things are going well. And so that while the commissioning is powerful and beautiful, it's also surrendered to whatever God will do next after us.
Yeah.
Humbling, kind of comforting. At least for right now in this moment, I've worked myself out of a thinking of like, if I don't do everything exactly right now, what's going to happen? Yeah. I'm the hero of this story, aren't I? And removing myself from that seat and saying, I get to foster and steward and certainly be a part of and do and lead a beautiful thing right here. But then it belongs to, just like for the disciples, that commission certainly didn't stop with them.
Yeah, and even like I said at the second service, I see a future, at the 100-year anniversary, 30 years from now, where you and I have handed off this church to a new generation of leaders, but we've handed off in good shape a thriving church that then continues to lean into their mission in their moment, in their generation, and that we can come back and celebrate that with them. I mean, so many things have to go right for all that to happen for 30 years from now, for us to be sitting in these seats celebrating with a new generation what God is continuing to do. Like, a lot could go wrong. Churches fall apart, leaders leave on bad terms. All those things could happen, but I believe it. I believe we're going to be sitting there years from now. And I think that long-term idea, that prophetic vision of what will be, has to rest on us. We have to have that interview. Otherwise, we start to think, to your point, that it's all about us, it's all about now, it's all about this moment. We're the thing. And I think the commissioning of God helps us to kind of zoom out a little bit, a lot.
That's a good point.
And say, no, this is not just your life or your lifetime, but this is a generational work that I'm not done with, and I'm going to continue long after you're gone.
Yeah, and we consider being commissioned sometimes, maybe especially in our line of work, giving some thought when you're in this process to commissioning.
Right.
That will eventually be our job, right? And that has to go into how we lead right now. That has to go into this moment, how we think about the future. We got to position ourselves to be great commissioners and not just great commissionees.
Yeah, and for anyone in leadership listening, right, it's probably your job on day one to start the process of identifying successors, identifying who will be, and maybe they're not here yet, right? But to have that mindset of not like, what am I going to accomplish? No, what am I going to hand off to someone who inevitably will come after? And I think that approach to ministry and life and leadership is missing a lot of times and necessary so that we do operate with God's authority in a way that doesn't destroy people's lives, right?
Yeah, got to take us out of that individualistic idea and into something that wants to carry on a heritage.
Yeah. Well, great message this weekend. And I think we're coming back next week with Pastor Mike Meeks, who is joining our speaking team. He's going to be speaking for the first time. And so we'll have a conversation with him. I know everyone's going to like this guy.
They're going to love him more than us, for sure.
For sure. All right. Thanks for joining us today. You can catch all of our back episodes at behindthemessage.com.